Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Calvert. I'm the head of fire consultancy at Frankham Risk Management Services. I've been tasked with discussing the subject of key information and showing you how good documentation for your building should be child's play. And that will be the theme of my presentation, child's play. During the course of the next 20 minutes, I'll be taking you on a quick tour of Regulation 38, building information modelling and the Hackett reviews, signposts for the future. Documentation is key to understanding the fire safety functionality of your building. The creation, maintenance and handover of relevant information should be a part of any robust management regime. Some of us think documentation is a chore. And this is understandable given the varied and site-specific nature of all the different items needed. We see on the screen the tangled web of information expected and requested at any point during the life of a building. Retaining and monitoring this can be an arduous task and is reliant on contractors, logbooks, paperwork and a lack of human error. However, it can be streamlined and simplified. And with an understanding of where each requirement comes from, it can help us to formulate a more structured approach through the lifetime of a building. The requirement for the provision of adequate fundamental documentation is stipulated from what we call Regulation 38 of the Building Regulations. You may hear this term bandied around. For example, there was no Regulation 38 documentation available. Where do you keep your Regulation 38 documentation? This is a question I get asked every day of my career. In fact, on the bus this morning, a small child came up to me, tapped me on the leg, Thomas Jr., his name was, and he said, "Fire Safety Dave, can you tell me what the hell is Regulation 38? When the hell is it necessary? When the hell do I receive it? What the hell sort of information is it?" I looked at this tiny, innocent child, slightly potty-mouthed child, and I said, "Let me take you on a journey through Regulation 38. This legal requirement for fire safety information was introduced to ensure that sufficient information is recorded to assist the eventual owner, occupier or employer to meet their statutory duties under the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. Regulation 38 is a requirement under the building regulations for England and Wales to provide fire safety information to the responsible person at the completion of a project or where the building or extension is first occupied." Tiny Thomas looked a little bit confused. "But when is it necessary?" I said, "Thomas," I looked at his innocent face, and I said, "all we need to do is look at the paragraph for Regulation 38, and we can see in the first section, underlined in red, crayon, where a building is erected or extended or has undergone a material change of use, that is when a package of fire safety information, as-built information which records the fire safety design of the building or extension, must be assembled and given to the responsible person for the premises." Thomas was still perplexed. "But when? When do I receive it?" I said, Tiny Thomas, all we have to do is read the second paragraph, as underlined above in blue. Regulation 38 documents should be provided by the person carrying out the work no later than the date of the completion of the work or the date of occupation, whichever is sooner. But Tiny Thomas started to get cross. His little brow started to furrow. He said, "But what sort of information? Tell me what sort of information." I said, "Tiny Thomas, we just look at the third paragraph underlined in orange. Fire safety information means information relating to the design and construction and the services, fittings and equipment provided in or in connection with the building or extension, which will assist the responsible person to operate and maintain it with reasonable safety." Key words there: design and construction, services, fitting and equipment, operate and maintain it with reasonable safety. However, Tiny Thomas became incandescent. His little red cheeks started to go rosy. Be more specific, he said. I said, "Okay, Thomas." I unfurled his little palm and took the Lego bricks out. And I made him a small, simple construction. I said, Thomas, this simple building made out of 13 blocks, 16 if you count the flowers in the garden. The guidance on the type of information which should be provided to comply with Regulation 38 is given in Appendix G of Approved Document B, Volume 2. Generally, this ties in with all the general fire precautions as described in Article 4 of the Regulatory Reform Order. So for simple buildings, we're talking about escape routes, means of detection, means compartmentation, sprinkler systems, smoke control, high-risk areas, and the other list, items on the list we can see in front of us. However, Thomas was not satisfied with this. Thomas said, I'm already building Lego constructions for 8 years and above. They're far more complex than your simple house. I said, Thomas, for complex buildings, this would include all the previous general fire precautions, but would be necessarily more detailed to account for all additional systems and fire-engineered solutions. So, for example, you may need to include additional details regarding CCTV, dry risers, HVAC systems, zone plans for your fire alarm system, software systems, block plans for your sprinklers, dampers, and, of course, your all-important fire safety strategy. However, Thomas looked at me quizzically. What did Dame Judith have to say about this? He asked. Well, I'm glad you asked me, Thomas. Dame Judith's final report, Building a Safer Future, published in May 2018, identified serious failings for the provision and passing on of key documentation. Quotes from the report, which we see in front of us, the Hackett Review heard almost unanimous concern surrounding the ineffective creation, maintenance and handover of building and fire safety information. Transparency of information and an audit trail all the way through the life cycle of a building, from the planning stage to occupation and maintenance, is essential. Currently, there are significant issues in the production, maintenance and handover of building information by those responsible for the design, construction, refurbishment and the duty holder in the occupation phase. But why is this a problem? What problems is this causing us? As alluded to in a number of the presentations this morning, the review identified a clear need for a golden thread of information for all high-risk buildings, a distinct series of key information originating during the design stage, augmented and adhered to throughout all construction stages and formally handed over on completion of the project. Key information that follows the building through its lifetime, regardless of building ownership or development. If this information is lacking, as the review specifically identified, it means it will be unclear whether any changes have been made between the original design and completion which may affect that fire safety strategy. It means the building owner does not have the required up-to-date information to be able to effectively manage building safety across its life cycle. And it means that when we refurbish our buildings, it will be difficult to ascertain what effects any changes may have on building safety. So going forward, the report Building a Safer Future recommended a BIM approach should be adopted. This is an approach which provides improved decision-making based on robust data, quality and compliance assurance as a result of structured record-keeping and contract management, efficiency through collaboration and innovation. Thomas wasn't sure. Thomas looked at me. What is this BIM you speak of? Who is BIM? Where do I find BIM? Building information modelling is a process for creating and managing information on a construction project across the project life cycle. This model draws on information assembled collaboratively and updated at key stages of a project. Creating a digital building information model enables those who interact with the building to optimise their actions, resulting in a greater whole life value for your asset. Think of the familiar Haynes manual, probably been around for hundreds of years. I don't know. I didn't research that bit. Where each element of the design is identified regardless of whether it was developed and manufactured in a different factory. How these elements come together and interact is recognised as integral, and ultimately they're all interdependent. BIM can take digital techniques pioneered in industries such as aerospace and automotive, and it applies them to construction. We have used this comprehensive approach for other industries for decades, and it allows us to understand how any construction is really designed. If we can use this approach for cars, U-boats, babies, galactic space stations, why do we not do it for our high-risk residential buildings where people live in them? Ask yourself these questions. Why do we not adopt such a forensic approach to our buildings? Why do we disregard the design intent of each individual element once the building is completed? Do the different elements of a building not work in conjunction together? Are they not fundamentally reliant on each other? Is every single element not essential in a building? It certainly should be regarding the fire safety precautions, as that is how the fire strategy designed them. It follows this will be a huge driver towards digital record keeping, which technologically industry is now in a position to do. Maybe we weren't 10 years ago. It is underpinned by a wider move towards transparency and integrity and a greater focus on effective change control. In 2016, the government required BIM Level 2 on all centrally procured projects, and the review makes note of BIM for Housing, a cross-sector working group building more and better homes. Already this approach is adopted in high-profile engineered designs and across the commercial sector. Heathrow Terminal 5, Crossrail, the cheese grater at 120 Leadenhall Street. The common advantage of the BIM system are equally exploited by all types of construction projects. Greater control over the project, its definition, its costs and deadlines, and the automation of production, which saves time in repetitive tasks. Control over the project is one of the main advantages of BIM, whether for a large project or a home. Deviations of budgets and costs are minimised, which has a positive impact. The automation of the production entails a time saving that can be used in other stages of the project. In this way, project efforts can be focused at the design stage and not at the production stage. This approach is yet to be filtered down to our high-risk residential building projects. The Hackett final review identified paragraph 8.20, your building records must be updated and managed in a security-minded way throughout the building life cycle. Many developers will already have the capability to adopt these standards immediately. However, where they do not, it is important to adopt a realistic timeline to successfully implement such a standard throughout our industry. This phased adoption will give industry the time it needs to adapt to these standards while taking into account other time-restrictive factors, such as the increase in skills required across our sector. This sea change is not going to be adopted overnight, but we must strive towards it now. The review goes on, 8.22, this emphasis remains on the use of BIM as an effective method ensuring high-quality records are kept, exchanged and used. Within this, the actual format is secondary. However, it is important for a client or asset owner to specify a requirement to deliver information or work in a BIM-compliant fashion. The client needs to set the requirement at the contract initiation stage. If it is left to the supply chain, it may not be as effective. It was at this stage I realised Tiny Thomas wasn't paying much attention to me. I tried to enthuse him, drag him back into the conversation by talking about a career path for his future. The focus going forward as an industry must be on improved collaboration, beginning at the design stage. This must be maintained through every stage of the construction process, starting from the design, then to the procurement of products, the pre-build, the various construction phases, all the way up to completion and beyond. If your fire safety support starts with a pre-occupancy fire risk assessment at the end of your project, then you've already left it too late, far too late. The whole project should be augmented with the use of a dedicated project fire safety inspector. The fire safety inspector should have a broad range of understanding based in fire consultancy, but being able to draw in fire engineering expertise when needed and call on specialist inspectors for specific elements of the build. This fire safety inspector should be involved from the start and have an understanding of the original fire strategy, continually cross-referencing back to it, ensuring any alterations in the build do not detract from it. The fire safety inspector can inspect your compartmentation before the final surfaces go on. They can examine the workmanship as it's being done and ensure that the Regulation 38 documentation is advised in a timely fashion with clear dates being set for the contractors so that it can be reviewed. They can maintain a relationship with your designers, the clerk of works, and the client throughout the construction stages. The review goes on, paragraph 8.29, to avoid placing unreasonable requirements on existing building owners where information has not been handed over from the construction phase or from the previous owner. The JCA may require less information than is required for new buildings. However, building owners must seek out evidence of the original fire design and assurance that the building is still capable of meeting that objective, the stay-put objective that it was originally designed to have. So intrusive surveys, fire strategies and clear, comprehensive information will still be required for buildings in order to build an accurate record as evidence to support the safety case. Intrusive surveys, I'm talking about type 4 fire risk assessments. As specifically noted within Dame Judith Hackett's final report, this work will be part of a phased introduction of a new regulatory framework for high-risk residential buildings, as we've heard today from Hyde Housing, already halfway through their project of Type 4s. If you haven't started yet, you're probably behind the curve. A Type 4 fire risk assessment, it covers all the issues within a conventional Type 1 visual fire risk assessment, but goes beyond that. It considers the viability of the stay-put strategy. It's the only real way to examine the compartmentation of your building. It's required less frequently. It's about quality, not quantity. There's no point us having a fire risk assessment every year if it's not looking at the right things. It will consider the building holistically, both the communals and the dwellings. How do we give a fire risk assessment to the building when we've only looked in the corridors and the stairwells, which makes up about 10 or 15% of the building? We must be going into the dwellings. It's already becoming widely adopted through the industry. Mentioned Hyde, L&Q, another large housing provider, halfway through their Type 4 project. And it's facilitating building owners to divert their resources to the correct things. Similarly, the fire strategy, the day of saying we don't have a fire strategy for this building, they've got to be gone. A fire strategy is a line in the sand detailing the design standards and specifications of the fire safety elements of the building. These will include compartmentation, means of escape, ventilation, and fire service access requirements. As long as this documentation is available during the life of the building, the way the different elements were designed and built is clear, and any works that may affect them can be reviewed against this strategy. It's a document. It should be originally provided at the design stage. It should be adhered to throughout the construction. It should be referred to throughout all future projects, and it should be redrafted by a fire engineer if it's not already in existence. It goes back to basics, and it ensures that other factors introduced to the building will never compromise the fire safety of that building. In summary, your building biography, it should be instigated right from the start of the design process. It should be maintained throughout all stages of any construction project. It should include original design intentions and the design fire strategy, and it should be updated with quality review and quality FRA exercises. It should be recorded in appropriate BIM format to allow access to the correct people. But it must be retrospective. It must look at the history of the building. It must be forward-looking, looking at the occupancy of the building. So I said to little Thomas, on this bus journey, we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about Regulation 38 and the expectations of what should be included in that documentation. We also talked about the Hackett Review's damning view of the current provision of maintenance and handover of building information. And then we talked about the review's requirement for a golden thread of information at all buildings and recommendations for implementing a building information modelling approach and the introduction of fire safety inspectors. We also talked about key marker documents for existing buildings such as fire safety design strategies and comprehensive intrusive fire risk assessments. It was at this stage I realised Thomas had got off the bus. He had collected all his Lego bricks and put them in his tiny, tiny knapsack and gone home to sort out the documentation for all of his Lego models. However, I hope this was helpful to you. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions on Type 4 fire risk assessments, fire strategies, or Regulation 38, or even Lego. Thank you very much.